Good morning, I'm Brigid Burke, and welcome to Morning Coffee with Brigid. It is now the 10th of June. We're about 10 days out from summer, so time is really flying by really quickly these days. It's very, I don't know, it's weird because to me it feels very late spring. Good morning, Sam. It feels very autumnal out there right now. I think I've talked about this over the last few days, and of course that's something that I love. I love when it feels like autumn out there. And but that's going to probably end by the end of this week. So I called my sister yesterday, and we usually go walking on Tuesdays. Monday and Tuesday. It's weird because I call Monday and Tuesday my off days, and I did work all weekend this weekend. I was working on readings. I did a life path reading this weekend. They take a long time and they're a lot of work. I usually allow 2 hours for them. Sometimes I feel like I need to allow more than 2 hours, like maybe 2.5 or something, because they take a long time to go through. And but nonetheless, I mean, they're really a rich source of information. There's what I discuss with the person, and then there's what they can look at on their own with regard to the material. I always try to keep it so that they have something that they can refer back to. So it's something, you get the big reading, and then it's got kind of a foundation of your astrology, of the Western astrology, the Vedic astrology, and all of the salient points, because any one of those charts you could go into for years. The more I learn about human design, because I've taken classes in human design. It's not like let's just see what this is. Like I've taken classes in human design, but there's just certain levels of it that are really, really that really can get into a really, really deep space, particularly when they talk about their concepts of the Godhead, which have to do with the ways in which we are conditioned. So in other words, it's the kind of it's the face, it's the God archetype, the face of the archetype that we see, and that informs everything that we do. And I think there are 4 quadrants. There's the quadrant of there's one of initiation, there's one of civilization, there's one of mutation. I'm trying to remember what the 4th one was. But they're basically, within those archetypes, there's different deities associated with it. And in the human design chart, your personality number, which is your sun personality number, there's two columns on a human design chart. You'll see red and black lines, and the black has to do with your design, like what you are. Actually, no, sorry, it's the other way. The red has to do with your design. It's what you are. That is who you are, unconsciously. The personality that you display based on that design, or maybe even in opposition to that design, is in the black side. And so whatever's on the black side, whatever the sun element is there, because it goes to each one of the planets, including Earth. The sun has to do with that sun personality type is the one that says what your main Godhead archetype is. And mine happens to be Janus. Okay, mine happens to be based on the gate number that is attached to that. Mine is Janus. So good morning, Melissa. I'm talking a little bit about human design charts. And and then the Janus has to do with ordering, and it's more in the I believe it's in the quadrant of civilization. So I tend to think about what it means is not that it's not saying that any of those particular archetypes are bad, but just that we may be conditioned to seeing everything in that way. Like I was looking at one the other day of an archetypes of mutation, and that has to do, and I think this one was Hades I was looking at in particular. And you love Janus. Yeah, I mean the two faces, Janus, and then his near cousin Portunus. They both have that same forward and backward looking kind of a thing. And then there's that little figure. I think is it Boa Island? I don't remember if I got that name right. But anyway, it's off the Irish coast. There's a one of the Aran Islands. I think there's a little Janus type figure, and of course January is named for Janus. But that's the idea of both looking backward and forward. And I think that's why I'm continually being exhorted to stay in the present and not worry about looking backward and looking forward, because my tendency is to do that. So it's saying that's where the conditioning is. And when you follow that conditioning, that Godhead archetype, when you follow that conditioning, that's when you start to run into whatever they call your not self theme. For me, I happen to be what they call a manifesting generator. So my not self theme is frustration, and get frustration and sometimes anger too. So when I start manifesting frustration and anger, it's because I'm not acting according to my design. That's what that means. And so so that basically, it's like when you start running into walls and you're getting frustrated, it's because somehow you are automatically probably worrying about too much about the future or too much about the past. And that is a habit that I have. I know I will sit there and like I could look at a beautiful day like today and say, wow, this is great. And I'll be like, yeah, but like I just said, like, yeah, but by Thursday, it's not going to be like it. I'm so worried about what's going to be ahead. And it's like, just worry about the fact that it's nice today. Who cares about what's going to happen like a week from now? Just stay in the present, So it's interesting. And to that point, I think the thing, rather than talking so much about human design, I was just talking about how when I do a life path reading, there's so much material that really I'm just getting to the highlights of everything, and I try to flesh out as much material as I can for people, because that is a very expensive report, but it is a lot of work. I think Saturday I was working on one. I started at 9, I took a break a little after 12, and then I went back at around 2:30, and I think I was done by 5. So, and that was kind of with everything, including writing up a final summary and everything. So it takes a long time to write them, and I usually only charge for 3 hours of time on those. But a lot of that's just the face-to-face time, and I do a reading with that as well. Whatever the person wants to know about, or I'll at least just try to give, if I do a general horoscope spread, and if I feel like that person needs like a path of balance, or if they need a reading like the one that we do every morning, then I'll do that as well. But it'll vary depending on what the person needs or what they may want at the end of the reading. And of course, I want to develop a version of that reading that I can do and record it and send it to people. If they say, look, I don't have time to sit with you for 2 hours, just record it and send it to me, and I'll listen to it when I have time. I just need to find a good recording app, like one that I can use that's not expensive, that I can do that, and it'll compress it enough that I can send it in an email to somebody. There is Google Drive, but not everybody has Google Drive. So I just want to have something that people can use, because obviously I do have Google Drive, and that is one way I can do it. So yeah. So anyway, I did those readings. They're actually very satisfying to do, though, because it's just so fascinating to see different people's charts and the way different things have manifested. And then when you talk to people and then you see how that astrology manifests in people's lives, and you talk about things, and the whole point of them is to kind of look at, there is a lot of focus on karma, challenges, and wounding and things like that. Not because you want it to be a negative chart, but oftentimes people are looking for something like that when they're at some kind of a transition. It may or may not be an actual crisis, but it may be a point where they may be saying, you know what, what I'm doing right now doesn't feel like me anymore, and I want to do something different. Or it could be that somebody reaches a point of crisis and says, okay, I need to do something different here. I can't, I just can't keep doing this the way I'm doing it. Or something is lost and now I have to figure out a new way. Like, that's the point at which these readings, it's kind of like, that's where we kind of get that sense of, okay, let's see what the foundation is. Like, what's in your natal chart? What are you up against? And also, what kind of transits are going on right now? Are you going through a Sadasati period, which is a very strong Saturn period that's usually mentioned in Vedic astrology. And the 7-year Sadasati period is one that people dread. But usually it happens, I want to say it can happen in the 20s. It can happen around, some people it happens in the 40s, other people around, I think my next one is due like when I'm in my 60s. Yeah, give it a few years, please. But it can't, it's not necessarily that your life is going to be terrible. It's just that you may have to work harder for things, and therefore you'll maybe feel more accomplished when you get through them. So just kind of seeing what the ground is like. If there's a Kalsarpa yoga is another thing that can come up in charts, and that is when planets are sandwiched between Rahu Ketu, which is the north and south node. When you see that kind of when you see a Kalsarp, what kind of effect that can have, because that can bring its own challenges. When I look at the Vedic chart, I tend to go very specifically into the D9 or the spouse chart. Now, sometimes we are dealing with somebody who's married, but sometimes people are not married after 35. It's not necessarily taken for granted that that's the case. So that chart, if somebody doesn't have a spouse, it definitely, if somebody's going to get married, then it would certainly tell you the characteristics of that spouse. But it tends to talk about all the elements of life after age 35. So whatever you did when you were growing up, usually 35 isn't necessarily the age. It's just kind of a point at which we make a shift. You know what I mean? At 35, we are, that's sort of considered, it used to be considered like that halfway point. Like Jung used to talk about it like it was the halfway point, but it's not necessarily the halfway. People don't, people could die at 70, but people don't tend to. We tend to think that's young now. People tend to live to be in their 80s, their 90s, or maybe even older. So that may or may not truly be midlife. But generally, it's sort of in psychological development. It's a point at which you probably have a pretty good idea of who you are, or you've built up an identity over time, and now you're turning around and saying, okay, maybe you may be, it could just be that you are transitioning and changing just naturally with age. The things that interested you when you were younger don't interest you when you're older. I think a lot about my ex-father-in-law, who I think has passed away now. But he was somebody who had done, I think he had worked as a printer's, like he had been an apprentice, and then he had his own print shop. Like he worked for years as a kind of union printer, like journeyman printer. And at one point, of course, then when I think I had gotten married in the early 90s, when he had, at some point, obviously with word processors and with things coming in at that time it was like WordPerfect and stuff like that. But still, we are certainly moving into an era now where those kinds of things are only really part of specialty presses. There are specialty presses that still might do the printing, kind of the old way. My sister is somebody who learned how to do all that from the ground up. She's really, that's why she never went to college, so it really annoyed her when she would go to get a job and they'd be like, oh, but you don't have a 4-year degree. But when she would work in typesetting, she was like, yeah, but I know how to do this the old way, and I know all the current programs, and I know how the whole package works together. And they would hire people who had 4-year degrees, and they would know how to use, they would have taken a Photoshop class, and they would screw everything up, and her bosses would get really annoyed, and she'd be like, well, and then they would try to rely everything on her, but they didn't want to pay her because she didn't have the college degree. It was ridiculous, But my sister is, she's 60 now, so it's, it was a time when we didn't necessarily do that. But my father-in-law, what he ended up doing is, at some point the shop closed down, and there was just no more work for him. And this is what he had built a lot of his even identity on over the years, was being working in printing. And I remember him telling me that he just got really, really depressed, and I think he was even hitting the bottle and everything. He was just not a happy camper, obviously, because his whole identity had just collapsed. Like the thing that he had identified with his whole life wasn't there anymore. But that's when he just kind of told, but he kind of had this idea of he had the value of, well, I'm the husband and I need to take care of my wife, and not an ideal his son really. That was he was the other way around. He's like, my wife could take care of me. But he decided to go into real estate, and he ended up becoming an appraiser. And of course, the type of guy he was like the president of the Appraisers Association. Like he really went in whole hog, and he really and he was good at that. He was actually a really kind of glib kind of a person. He was a very good salesman and stuff like that. So he just reinvented himself. And good for him. Good for him that he did that. He was able to create a new identity later in life. Okay, so that was kind of the point. Although I think he still always kind of held to this way of thinking, or this value stream or whatever, that may or may not have been the best for him. But ultimately everybody lives their life the way they want to. So I'm just thinking of it in terms of the impact that he might have had on other people at times. But but everybody has that. We all have things that we do that we feel very committed to, and maybe they don't jive with other people, and that's just how it is. There's never going to be a perfectly harmonious situation. So anyway, so those charts those human design charts can really, really get into deep level, because they include astrology, I Ching, Kabbalah, and I feel like there's a couple of other things in there as well, because all of those gates that are in there are based on trigrams of the actually, yeah, it's the 64 trigrams that you would have of the I Ching, because there's 64 gates. And so it's all connected to that energetically, and of course they refer to them as being connected to DNA keys and things like that. So human design is kind of one of those things that's endless, and I feel like when I do the life path reading, I'm really kind of scratching the surface of it a lot of times with people, although I do get into a lot more depth in the reports. Okay, so enough about that. The other thing I was going to talk about today, I did dream last night, and for me, this is kind of a north-south node kind of thing for people. And it's kind of worth looking at your chart to see where your north node is natally, and also where it is right now. So if I give myself as an example, my north node is in the 8th house, natally in Aquarius. Okay, and my south, which means my south node is in Leo. So my south node, my past, is more about, and here I am talking past and future. We were just talking about Janice, right? But the past is about, you had to do with, that's in the area of finance, financial independence, security. The 8th house is just the opposite. It's more about learning to be supported by others or relying on other people for your finances, or having a joint financial situation. And that's an oddity for me. I'm thinking like, like I said, when I was married, that's the last time I had that. Oh my God, same. Aquarius 10th house though. Why do we have you're saying, why do we have so much in common? It's really funny because I also find that when I do charts and work for people, that as I'm going through their charts, I'm like, oh, they have this too, and they have this too, and they have this too. Even doing my own sister's chart, I was like, wait, why do we both have Pluto in like Virgo in the 4th house? Like we're born, like she's 9 years older than me, It's why do we have these certain things? Yeah, it's really funny how we all kind of tend to gravitate towards people who have the same aspects in their chart. It is interesting. So yeah, and actually you mentioned the 10th house. The 10th house is actually where my north node is right now. So I feel like a lot of that energy is kind of being directed in the career area, and so that would be the case for you. I mean, that would be, natally your north node is your life task and your work is going to be in terms of your legacy, or what you're going to. And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean like a financial legacy. Just what work am I doing that I'm leaving behind for humanity, so to speak. That's the idea of legacy. Like whatever our work is, whatever our passion is that we share with others. So. And that and that's also considered to be the house of career and fame and reputation and things like that. So that's where your north node is, and that's actually where my north node is natally. Not natally, but in transit right now. That's where it is. So it's over 10th and 4th house, and of course, yes, I am dealing with a lot of digging up and finishing a lot of business with regard to family, because 4th house is about family. So interesting how it falls. But natally, if you have I have north node in Aquarius in the 8th house. So 8th house is the house of transformation. And yeah, kind of strange that my whole career and everything is based on transition life coaching. Like everything I'm doing seems to be based on helping people through transitions, and then the work I'm doing with Azrael. I'm just going to mention something quick about that too. One thing that I've started doing and that I'm going to start posting, and I'm not sure if it's going to be, I have a group on the Transition Life Coaching page, a client group page, and I'm not sure if I'm just going to post these there or if I'm going to post them publicly or not, but I'm starting to do weekly channelings with Azrael. And I'm going to say, I know this sounds weird, but I'm going to couch it as at his request. So I have, and I'm doing them, I'm recording them basically and downloading the Zoom files and I need to just go through, because if there's long spaces of silence or whatever, I want to edit those out. So I need to look through what's been said there. But that's been a really interesting and strange experience. But the North Node in the 8th house for me, and that's where Pluto is right now, by the way. Pluto's right, and I'm actually at 1 degree of, my North Node's at like 1 degree of Aquarius, and guess what? That's where Pluto is. Pluto's kind of been dancing around that for right now. So as soon as Pluto hit Aquarius, I'm like, that's when everything, it's just like, okay, it's time to, it's like a double or triple whammy of transformative energy there. So it's like, it's like, so I feel like I'm getting a lot of stuff. I use these Black Moon astrology cards, and I keep getting the North Node card. Like, okay, North Node, and when I had my little mini crisis last week, I kept getting South Node. So it was like, don't don't get caught up in the past. You need to be looking towards where you're headed at this point. Like what the whether life has a meaning or not, whatever task we are, or whatever it is we are, trying to integrate into our lives, that's what we need to focus on. So so there's been a lot around that for people. It just seems like the nodes seem to be very much activated in people's charts. And I think I was talking about how I was dreaming last night. And when I was dreaming, point being with the North Node, this idea of working with people instead of just working on your own. Like, that's the lesson for me. Like, you're working in tandem and not just by yourself. And so, like I said, I have been not in any kind of serious relationship for quite a long time now, actually. I mean, it's not that I haven't dated people here and there, but it's like I've not been in anything. Like, I haven't been married since, I think my divorce was in 2003, right? So it's been a long time. So it's almost like it's pointing me towards, and I keep having dreams that, and the message that seems to come out of them is like, yeah, there is relationship that's coming up, or that's building, but something that I have to be incredibly patient with. I feel like there's a lot of morality around things where you want, where we have an expectation, if there's an interest, that somebody's gonna just, do something right away, and it's like. And sometimes even like you'll talk to friends and stuff about people and they'll say, well, I think nothing's ever going to happen there, or that person's going to take forever or whatever. And something is just kind of like, you have to be super patient. That's kind of the message I've been getting lately about relationships in general. I mean, you have to be super patient because whatever comes up has to be something that's very solid, not just like a kind of a fly-by-night romance, whatever is next for me, which, and I'm not saying that I know really exactly what that is. I mean, I have some speculations, but I don't specifically know. So, and the card that I got in last night's dream was interesting, was absorption. Okay, and the absorption card is about, it says, this is when individual identity is devoured by the forces which end it. The point of individual identity is the choice to resist archetypal forces or go with them to an ecstatic but mythical doom. Wow, that sounds interesting. If we feel inadequate, we may want the intensity of identifying with an archetype, sacrificing any ability to fulfill ourselves as conscious human beings. The adversity of being taken over is of the subtlest kind. Guard against it by committing to an integrated act that strengthens your being as you create with superior forces in a balanced way. Right. So really, that's the long way around of saying that you need to stay grounded, especially when dealing with archetypal forces. I have a book of short stories that I produced, and it was in 2018 that I put it out, called Archetype Possession. And really they were stories I had written around 2010, between like 2010 and 2012. And what I just did was one evening when I was working at my job, it was a quiet night, and I was just looking over some of my stories, and I thought, you know what, I have all these, and I published all of them previously in different journals, both online and in print. And most of them, there was a couple new ones, but I thought, I'm going to throw these into an anthology, and I'm going to put them out on CreateSpace. I just, spur of the moment, I just did it. And actually, it's really interesting. Amazon Kindle Publishing actually is quite good. I mean, in terms of formatting, in terms of look, even in terms of how the books come out. I work with Ingram Spark now because, Ingram's a wider distribution. If you work with Amazon, then you can't distribute your book elsewhere. I mean, Amazon is the exclusive distributor. If you work with Ingram, you could walk into your local, Barnes & Noble, Blackwell's, whatever, and you could order my books, which you cannot do if it's the other. You just have to order. You can only order it directly from Amazon. But when I was working on this book, I mean, it's the idea of archetype possession. This was an idea that I was really playing with a lot back in those days. And this is what I think of when I think of the absorption, because it's the idea that when an archetypes are part of the unconscious. They're very, very powerful forces. And when we talk about them as archetypes, that's why I get kind of, I don't know if the word is really annoyed, but I kind of just shake my head, I guess, when I see things that'll say like, oh, what's your archetype? What's your feminine archetype? What's this archetype? I'm like, that's not what an archetype is. And when people kind of use archetype as kind of like the way you might use a stereotype or a personality type, archetypes have nothing to do with your personality. Archetypes are these numinous forces of your consciousness. And when they move in and take over, like I've talked about the falling in love example. That's one example of an archetype that can take over. And a lot of these stories are about people who can go off the deep end with that, go into obsessive areas, or go into, like the whole way in which the soul can be torn apart by certain archetypal conditions. Because the archetype it's like that devouring feminine force. This is probably something I'm going to talk about on the Katonia podcast live stream today too, which is at noon today. But when we talk about the devouring feminine, you're talking about this. I think one of the reasons is because it's like symbolically or archetypically, I should say, not symbolically, it's like the battle for consciousness. It's the battle to not simply be absorbed into the archetype. And the problem with that is then if you look at people who are in very severe schizoid states, people who don't talk but like smear things on the walls, there's these, it's this inability to connect with the ego. One is completely lost in the unconscious. It's like you're swimming in the dark water and there's no land in sight, and that's where you don't want to get to. You don't want to be. It's like being it's like being in the ocean with like a tide and a high tide and trying not to be sucked in by the rip tide. It's like you want to be able to flow with the waves, or you want to be able to swim adequately in those waves. That might be a better way of looking at it. And so, so I had done a whole book of, they're all dark tales. So for people, it's really funny because some of my books, because they deal with material that's a little bit more disturbing, mainly because I think writing is how I deal with, whether it's ancestral material, whether it's, what we're going to call past life material, although I'm not even convinced that there's such a thing as a past life. I feel like it's a concurrent life, when we're dealing with that material, I deal with it through writing, and sometimes in very, very disturbing kind of ways to certain people. But the whole point is that it's the idea of getting the disturbing narrative on the table so it can be kind of storied through. When you do that, I think this is a lot of the reason that you have myth and things like that as well. It allows you to story. I think I was talking about something about this the other day. Being able to story something is a way of grappling with it, of grappling with its meaning without losing your own identity. It's allowing you to take the metaphor and to ground it into something that's conscious, rather than just have it being this kind of amorphous thing. And and at the most basic level, we're talking about grounding. Okay, about being grounded and managing to ground in your energies, especially when you are in that very Neptunian or Piscean space where you're just like, woo. And I think the reason I brought up the channeling is because that can leave me in that kind of a space. When I finish, as soon as I'm done doing channeling, it's like I have to go I have to go eat potatoes or something. Like I need something that's going to pull me back down to the earth, because I'm walking around and I feel like I'm, I don't want to say that the room is spinning, but there's just like a weird way that things feel after I get out of a channeling session. And I'm, as somebody who's fairly new to this kind of whole thing, I have to really get used to that. And when I'm done, it's like, okay, you've got to be able to put your feet back on the ground and get back into where you were, which is anybody who's a practice medium knows how to do that. They know what their limits are. But also I find too that and really I feel for me, that's also part of the reason why it's very hard for me to say, okay, like I might go back and take a 9-to-5 job and drive somewhere every day, because it's almost like I need space to be able to decompress or to get back where I am again. If I get into a state like that and then I decide, okay, well now I'm going to, if I had to go get up and go to work after that, say, or something like that, I don't really know how I would do it. It's like, it's not, there's definitely, so when I see this absorption card, I'm thinking, okay, yeah, there's this need to balance working with the archetype, because the archetype is also, especially the soul archetypes, are definitely the source of creativity. You don't want to avoid them. You don't want to repress them or put up a wall against them necessarily, but when you interact with them, you also don't want to be sucked in by them totally either. So it's rather, excuse me, it's a rather interesting theme that's come up lately. And I've also been seeing it in connection to, like, there's a whole lot coming up around partnership too. I did a few readings this morning to try to interpret some of the dream material that I had, and I got the Lovers in one, I got the 7th house in this one, which is the partnership card. I was getting a whole lot around partnership, and I'm like, what are we talking about here? Like, what's that about? But clearly that's going to be a theme. And, this card jumped out. Patience card just jumped out. And it's just funny. I said at the beginning of the live stream, I was like, I keep getting this whole thing about being patient around relationships. And then I just mentioned, like, yeah, I'm getting stuff about relationships. And then the patience card jumps out. So, isn't that weird, good morning, Sudha. Okay. So let's do our reading for today. If you joined late, my theme was talking about, I was talking a little bit about life path charts and human design and that aspect of it, and the kinds of things that are part of that, but I was also talking about the idea of absorption or being absorbed into an archetype, and a little about the channeling work that I do. So, for a quick recap, let's see. Okay, so what do viewers need to know? I'm always counting to 11 in my mind. I don't know why I have to shuffle 11 times. But the Lover's card comes up in the center again. Oh my goodness. All right, so this can't be just about me. Okay. But as to Sam's point before, it's just kind of like, yeah, it's interesting how I may be talking about things that are happening for me, and then or just certain aspects of my chart, and then it turns out that other people have the same things, and the people who are watching me are the people who have the same things. So it's interesting. Okay, so the Lovers is our central card here, and it's yay, and yeah. So okay, so the different meanings of this card. Obviously, there's an obvious meaning to it. Now, in this particular deck, the inflection is more about love that is not superficial. Okay, it's more about getting into a space of deep love, or of what love is that's not. And I want to be careful when I say this, because I think a lot of times we try to say, oh, well, there's lust and then there's love. It's like Plato, there's Aphrodite Pandemos and there's Aphrodite Urania. There's the celestial love, the platonic love, the one that's about intellect and sure, yes, there's definitely a level of love that is not just about, wow, you look good and I want to shag you kind of love. But I also feel that people kind of disenfranchise or dismiss that as somehow not being part of the equation. And let's face it, when we get married to somebody or whatever, we're just kind of like, well, I'm completely not attracted to this person, but they check all the other boxes. So, and I suppose, when you were talking about days when you would have arranged marriages and things, I don't know, people still do arranged marriages in India, but certainly the people involved are allowed to make a decision about who they're marrying. Like, they don't have to. If they meet the person and go, nah, their parents aren't going to make them marry that person. Usually, I would think. At least that's my experience from talking to friends. But outside of any kind of thing like that, when we meet somebody, generally you marry somebody that you've fallen in love with, right? And there's generally a physical component that goes along with that. So I don't like to say, oh, there's that base animalistic thing, and then there's this higher spiritual thing, and that's kind of the way that people tend to split it. And I don't think that split is there. I just think that's all part of it. And like anything, it flows. There's going to be times when there's going to be more of the physical, and then there's times when it's going to be more, again, more practical. Not being, falling in love is an ultimate form of archetype possession. Well, maybe not the ultimate, but it's the most common one, certainly. And so, we don't want to, you think of love as almost a merging with another person, but it isn't exactly that. It's like there is a certain merging that takes place, but there's also a separateness there. And there has to be. You have to be kind of two separate people who are doing the same thing together, ideally in harmony with each other, okay? Now, the inner feeling of which we're unaware about this is the morality card, Queen of Clouds. So this is interesting because this would have to do with perfection and the kind of rules that we have around love. So sometimes let's just say we are talking about love here. Let's just say you meet someone, and let's just say there's a lot of things about this person you like, and you say, oh, but they don't do this, or they don't have that one thing. I have a friend who had talked about somebody who he fell in love with, and then it was like when and he said, yeah, it was just great, and I'd gone over her flat, and I realized she had no bookshelves. And I was like, well, I can't marry somebody who doesn't have books in their house. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it was like, I was like, okay, like, maybe that's not totally being fair to her. You know, maybe it's okay if you're a reader and she's not. Like, does she have to be? Is that a requirement? But I don't know. Maybe for him it was. But point being is that we sometimes have these things where we can expect a certain level of perfection in people, and we can judge people very, very harshly. And that is actually an aspect of the soul archetype. And they talk about it as being part of the animus. I imagine it's part of the anima as well, where there's a very, very strong sense of judgment about, how a person lives up to a certain standard. So sometimes it could be that unconsciously we create walls because, and it's good to have standards, by the way. This is not saying have no standards. But this is saying that sometimes we expect a perfection out of people that we don't even have in ourselves. And perfection is also not a thing to strive for. Perfection means it's perfici. I can speak Latin. Perficery. It has to do with, that means to finish. That means to be done. And truthfully, if you did have a partner who was perfect in that sense, who was complete, was finished in every way, shape, or form, you'd be tired of that person pretty quickly, and you'd want to go on to something else. Because the nature of things is that there's always going to be that kind of this back and forth. There's going to always be that ebb and flow. If it's just static, one thing forever, then that's also not very interesting. The external feeling of which we are aware is the experiencing card. Okay, 3 of Wands. So this is really, 3 of Wands, experiencing. This is about allowing yourself to experience things, not being totally in this mental space where you're actually alienated from your feelings, but one where you're actually experiencing them. Okay. And again, this doesn't even necessarily have to do with love per se. It can even just have to do with the way in which we connect with people in the heart space. Okay, that's what I think of it as. It's not even just, it can be about friends, it can be about family, it can be about a lot of things. It can be about making those connections. And the experiencing is allowing yourself to feel those feelings. With love, especially, if people have been wounded, then they may just, they may meet people and then be like, all right, I've got to keep my feelings in check. I don't want to fall in love with this person. I don't want to. And we deprive ourselves of that experience. But also, because as soon as we're in that experience, we kind of want it to last forever, and rather than just kind of going with it as it comes. And because it is a really nice feeling to be in. It's almost like, it's almost akin to doing drugs. Well, I just, for clarification, I don't do drugs. But but it's supposed to be that feeling that people have when they have that euphoria that makes them addicted to it and wanting to do it over and over again. I think that's why people can go through multiple partners too, because they get addicted to that feeling. And then it's like, okay, I've been with you. Oh, okay, I don't feel that way anymore. Okay, let's move on to the next one. And, so you can get addicted to that as well. But nonetheless, I think if we are able to get into that flow and to allow ourselves to just experience something rather than shutting it out because emotions are too complicated or whatever, and trying to take this kind of clinical, detached way of doing things. So yeah, this seems to be for a lot of people, about getting into the flow and feeling love. And see, our advice card is playfulness, okay? This is the Knight of Wands. So in this card, this is about play. It's interesting because the Knight of Wands in traditional decks is about a player. A lot of times if somebody is doing like a love reading or something, the Knight of Wands comes up with somebody. It could be somebody with extreme passion, but it can also be just somebody who is not very serious. Like, they're playing, and of course a lot of times, women especially, well, men too, they don't like somebody who's a player, in a lot of cases. But playfulness here is more about allowing yourself to play with energy rather than trying to feel that you have to, it's kind of like seeing the butterfly come by and then feeling like you have to stick it in a jar and then put it on a thing with pins in it, in which case you've killed it, right? You don't necessarily need to trap something. You can let it kind of freely flow. And the idea is playfulness, that you want to open your heart, be vulnerable, and allow yourself to experience the world and have it be as play, not as this extraordinarily serious venture that's life or death, it's or that is whether you could make grave errors and, I was in that relationship and it didn't work and now I'm hurt. See, that's a sign I should never get in a relationship again, or I should never do this and never do that. Like the kind of things that we do to ourselves. This is more or less saying, like, it's a play. And when you're vulnerable, I mean, you allow yourself to fail and succeed. And yes, of course, your emotions go up and down, and we don't like that. We want a stable emotions. And obviously, when we have a partner, we want to have somebody who is stable. Trust me, take it from me. You don't want to be married to somebody whose moods change by the hour. It's a challenge, to say the least. So it's, unless, and like I said, certainly if it's somebody who is leaning on their partner for emotional support, which, again, it's something you learn with time. With time, the more sure you become of yourself, the less that's an issue. But just allowing yourself to play. And ultimately, we have the Six of Pentacles, which is the card of compromise. So that's interesting, because on the one hand, this is a card of give and take. Six of Pentacles in a traditional deck, again, there's kind of a positive or negative inflection. It's a card of charity and almsgiving. So the question is, like, whether or not somebody has to be supportive of you or give something to you. They show there's two people that look like mendicants sitting there like beggars looking for money, and the rich man is giving it to one person, but he's not paying attention to the other one. So there's this matter of giving, and also the question is, are you the mendicant or are you the person giving it? Which side are you on? So this may be talking about relationships where one person may be giving too much and the other is not, or relationships in which we settle. We settle for something, and and again, there's the morality card. On the one hand, we don't need to be overly perfectionist in looking at our partner. Your partner, whoever you're with, they're going to have some kind of flaws. We all have flaws, like flaws, so to speak. We all have things that people may or may not prefer about us, but compromise is the other end of the spectrum. You don't also want to just say, well, like, this is the best I can do, or you don't want to say, if something really does not come from the heart space, if you really feel like the heart is not there, then that's something to reflect on. Because compromise is about not compromising your truth. So love, okay, what's coming in my head, love should not make you compromise your truth. Okay. And oh my goodness, a hawk just flew over the house. Just literally came towards my window. So take that omen of what make of you what you will with it. But it's definitely, there's this idea here of not compromising the heart, and allowing. There's been a lot around vulnerability and opening up the heart recently, and again, so interesting theme that's coming up here about connecting with others, and probably if I look at this in a more global sense, if we just think about what's going on globally. There's a lot of boundary setting. We're seeing a lot. Just one minor example is kind of the way in which countries are about immigration, cracking down on immigration and things like that. Now, again, you can talk about the policies and controlling borders and what that means and what the positives and the negatives. The idea that you can't have a totally open border, but at the same time you don't want to be inhumane to people. There's that whole back and forth. But it seems to be that when immigration becomes a thing of, we don't want those foreigners in our country, when you start to see that kind of a thing, that's more of a xenophobia. That's more like the idea that, we're not accepting of, and that usually comes out of fear. I need to establish my boundaries. I can't allow anybody or anything that's new or different or maybe outside my experience because I want to stay in this space that I'm in. And so a lot of that comes out of that split. The mind has really left us kind of alienated. And so we're very much in our head, and we don't actually experience things. We analyze things. We interpret and analyze all the time. Language is going through our head all the time, which again does not have to be a bad thing, but it's just sometimes it's to the point that we could be you're in the midst of an experience, and then you start thinking, well, what if this goes this way? And what if this happens? And then the mind just immediately jumps in and kind of ruins the experience because you're no longer in it. There's one of the Norse runes, and I can't remember which one it was, but basically it was Laguz. Laguz has a lot to do with, it's a moon, the rune, it's connected to the moon. And basically it has to do with the idea that immersing yourself in the experience of living without having to evaluate or understand. Okay, so just allowing yourself to experience without having to put an interpretation on it or try to, dissect it in some way. So I think that's what this is about. It's kind of about going with the flow of things, and the love may not just be of another person. I mean, but there's also a push towards the collective. We've become all very much about me and mine and what I'm going to get for myself, and how you over there, whether it be an immigrant, whether it be a poor person, because people do that with poor people now. Well, they're just people who don't want to work hard, and they're taking advantage of my hard-earned money. You hear that, at least where I live, I hear a lot of that, unfortunately. But there's this whole thing about, what's mine, and it's like, well, we need to think more about what we have to share with others, not about being more in community. This is why when people talk about, now we've lived in a very kind of patriarchal world, and now we're moving into one that's more feminine. That's really what I think the sense of it is. Like, seeing how we work together, not how we separate from each other. So anyway, hope that makes sense. Thank you so much. We're at 7:15, so I should probably go. I have another live stream at noon on Katonia podcast. See, one word over on the other Instagram feed, and so I'll be doing that from 12 to 1. I'm not sure. Some of this is like, especially about like the devouring feminine. Oh, you're welcome. Some stuff about the devouring feminine will probably end up in that. The podcast this week is coming out this morning. It's on the Sheila Na gig, and the image on architecture, and what else was coming up. I don't know. Anyway, I'll probably talk about that there. But anyway, I hope all of you have a great day. It's Monday, so I hope you all have a great week. And of course, you're welcome. And so, so enjoy your week, and I will be here tomorrow morning. And if you can join me, awesome. If not, like I said, we recorded as usual.